Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Nada Farhat from العربية News Network, and I have with me today two panelists who have made it their mission to drive positive change. We're going to be talking today about sustainability and climate change. Welcome my guests. I have Sanda Ojiambo, who is the CEO and Executive Director at UN Global Compact, and I have Alexis Lecanuet, who is the Managing Director for the Middle East at Accenture. Welcome. Last November, world leaders met in Glasgow at the climate change conference, COP26, to pledge taking measures to reduce the worst impacts of global climate change, excuse me. What are your takeaways from the conference that was deemed a bit fragile in its win?
First, thank you for having me and for all of those who are joining. You know, COP26 was, I think, one of those conferences where we all went in with a lot of optimism. There had been challenges. Obviously, we haven't convened for a year due to the pandemic. But what the pandemic year had also shown was that the climate crisis was real and there was a lot of urgency and the need to really raise the level of ambition around climate action. I left COP feeling that it was truly a private sector COP. You know, a couple of key outcomes for me. I felt the private sector was bold, private sector was ambitious, private sector was actually asking governments and policymakers to be very clear about what their ambitions were and what really we were going to tackle in terms of goals, of targets, of being very credible in terms of what private sector is going to bring to the table to support country efforts and country actions towards addressing the climate crisis. You know, there were some areas of clear disappointment. I think we failed to reach consensus on climate financing. The focus perhaps on areas such as adaptation and resilience was not as sharp and as pointed as it needed to be. We barely kept 1.5 alive, but we did. So I think, you know, the key issues are still on the agenda. Climate mitigation is obviously very critical for moving forward and keeping that 1.5 trajectory. But we did also obviously realize that, you know, without climate finance, without keeping the promise alive of how to address adaptation, resilient, just transition, we will not able to really collectively address the climate crisis. So as I say, I left with a little bit of a mixed bag of feelings, but clarity that the private sector has a real role to play.
And how close do you work with businesses after the conference?
Well, for the Global Compact, we have a core group of companies that have made strong commitments to addressing the climate crisis, and we will continue to work with them in a number of ways. First is setting targets, making sure that these targets are in line with science-based targets so that we're clear that we're on a very clear trajectory, but we continue to mobilize, you know, across the world. The climate crisis is not one where any sector, any industry is going to solve it. We need concerted partnership between private sector, government, certainly the UN and civil society. So for us, addressing climate is key and it's part of our core agenda.
Okay. You're part of a global company that can make an impact, and if you lead in certain areas, you drive people around with you. You're like a leader in the global market. Recently, Accenture released a report, the CEO Sustainability Study. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it manages to tackle the emergency of climate change?
Yes, sure. And first, thanks for the opportunity. You know, as you mentioned, Accenture, as a UN Global Compact lead member, is committed till 2008, and we even start working 2007, mostly producing content research. And what we released this year is probably the most comprehensive survey across more than 1,200 CEOs globally about what's next, what are their expectations, what are their status, what are their ambition, and their ask to COP26. And I think the study was coming mainly with 5 asks from the CEO. Overall, I think we can say that this is basically to be more pragmatic, more specific, to translate the intent into real way to collaborate. And to collaborate across industries, as was mentioned, to collaborate across countries also. So the 5 asks, if I go through, the first one was to align the famous national determined contribution on the path to limit the global temperature rise. And each of those asks, despite, let's say, the contrasted outcome, was showing some step in the right direction. So I will probably mention the step that we can see. And on this first one, 44 countries will end coal by 2030. That's an outcome. And 80 countries commit to reduce methane emission by 30% by 2030. So this is a step in the right direction toward this ask. The other ask around global cooperation is really to address mechanism on the carbon pricing. And this, similarly, there is foundational rules that are now here for the trade carbon emission. So it's one step in the right direction. The third ask was to meet and exceed the $100 billion commitment in climate financial goals for the global south. And this, in this region, this is one of the important asks, because the access to financing and the impact is probably more than elsewhere. And here we have now existing pledge up to $96 billion committed that are now, let's say, developing and being committed. The fourth ask about existing common standard for biodiversity protection. So similarly, this is enabling cross-country global collaboration on the biodiversity topic. 134 countries, which is representing 91% of the global forest, are currently agreed to halt or reverse the forest loss by 2030. This is a step. So in every direction, 100 companies globally commit to be nature positive by 2030. So, and of course, at the end of the day, increase the business engagement in climate policy formation for collaborative climate action. So, globally, enhance collaboration, creating global rules in order to strengthen the private sector contribution to the national goal and to the industry ecosystem play. This is, I think, the steps that were there.
Isn't it costly to be sustainable? How can companies compete when they have to have budgets for sustainability? They say it's sometimes costly and they don't profit as much as they would have had they not been aware of being environmentally friendly and sustainable.
It's basically going out of the paradigm of cost only. And you saw that during the pandemic. There is a lot of challenges that were considered costly. Having remote working, enabling employee to remote work, having disruption in the supply. So costly maybe the first impression, but at the end of the day, you need to deliver value across what we sometimes call the 360-degree value creation, including the planet, including the employee, including the customer. So there is a view where this sustainable development will create more value in the overall 360 view, may come and may start with cost. But any technology revolution that is heavily transformative those days are starting with cost. So the discussion, I think, and some of the points of the COP26 were clear on that, is more about leveraging and yielding the investment rather than evaluating the cost. Now on the cost, I think I want to mention something also, because the access to financing and the negative impact of the pandemic is higher in the global south. So we cannot ignore that the financing and the funding barrier is higher in the global south than for the global companies that were mostly surveyed here.
Okay. With the 17 SDGs and the 10 principles of the Global Compact, how much do you feel a difference is being made? Should it go at a faster pace? Is it not going to reach its goals fast enough? How hopeful should we be from all these meetings and conferences? And we feel every time there is a meeting, we're getting closer to resolving the climate change issue. How close are we? Are we going at a good pace?
Right. I mean, first I'd like to say I think meetings, convenings are important for us to take stock. But the real action, I think, happens outside of the meetings. There's a lot of work that's being done at country levels, but clearly I think we've said that the pandemic has set us back. Before the pandemic, we also said, at least from the UN perspective, we were not fully on track. But it's very clear that gains have been made in some of the SDGs and certainly not all. I think areas where there are key concerns remain obviously the climate crisis, rising inequalities, economies have collapsed, millions of people are out of jobs, specifically vulnerable populations, women, young people, just not able to get back into formal employment and income-earning opportunities, and then layer that over with the challenges of the pandemic. So I just want to go back and also reflect on something in the CEO study, because I want to tie it back to business and what we do at the Global Compact. One of the most interesting statistics from the CEO study was that CEOs felt that if there was anything that had actually disrupted their business and their supply chains over time, it was the climate crisis. And that if that was not fully addressed, business stood a huge risk at not being sustainable, not being inclusive, and also not really meeting both principles and purpose. So it's very clear that issues such as climate are fundamentally affecting businesses right from the start. So, the goals are all interlinked. I think it's very hard to sort of pick out one and say that, by solving this goal, you may solve the others. From a business perspective, what we have done is looked at what are the goals where business can have the highest amount of impact to both transform the world for business, but also for its citizens and for the consumers, and what we need to do for humanity. And we've zeroed down on a couple. I mean, climate is one, as we've said. It's very integral to supply chain issues, to sustainability and long-term business profitability. Business working on gender is obviously really critical, because having women as decision makers around your boardroom table, having women as decision makers in your supply chain, having fair and equitable work opportunities for women as equal contributors to the economy is also very critical. Making sure that business also helps address some of the rising inequalities are very important. And also having a business and business entities that are free of corruption, free of bribery, and really work towards enabling a strong and a sustainable business environment. So there's a couple of key areas where we feel that business can truly make an impact. But I just want to reiterate, and I think that's really the essence of the Sustainable Development Goals, is that the goals will be achieved in collaboration and cooperation. Private sector needs to work hand in hand with government, with civil society, and with the UN to really give that lift that is needed. Underpinning all of that is obviously finance and capital, and how we move financing to be able to support the ambition and the needs of the SDGs.
Given you're the managing director in this region, in the Middle East, COP27 and 28, 27 is going to be in Egypt and 28 here. What are you looking at to deal with in the region for the next 2 years?
No, I think it's a blessing that COP28 will be hosted in the region, and this was announced, a few weeks ago, and we already see an impact. Because while the region was, as I was mentioning, probably more impacted by the pandemic, some ingredients of the resilience that was built on the back of the pandemic can turn into clear advantage in the region for the transformation, to support the transformation. And I will name mostly, let's say, three: the workforce and workplace resilience. Because today, when you survey the CEO, there are three things that are already, so whether extreme weather or climate change, already impacting the business. You mentioned the supply chain disruption. It's in the range of 50% of the global CEOs. You mentioned also the access to natural resources in the food and beverage, especially. It's already 50% of the global food and beverage business. So this is happening here. But the resilience built on the back of the pandemic for the workforce, for the supply chain, for the organization of work, and the data enablement early adoption are three ingredients that can turn into advantage to address the acceleration of the transformation. And we see that happening. So I think the fact that COP28 is in the region is probably hope for the world, because a heavy oil and energy country is showing that he wants to lead the pack. It's also hope for the region, because here, when you have the country leadership setting the vision, setting the ambition, the ability of the ecosystem to collaborate, to onboard the whole community, not only the main stakeholder of the private sector, into the transformation is here. And we believe, and we see that in the last few weeks, that incoming call to get our support as Accenture on the transformation, on raising the ambition and having more companies in the region committing to the climate change action plan.
We're almost out of time. Before we leave, give us something very positive about what to expect in the next, up until 2030. How good is it going to be for us? How advanced the tackling of the climate change issue going to be? Okay.
I think one of the things that really excites me is, well, not excites me, I see lots of hope and optimism in a lot of the positions, the energy, and the action brought about by young people. I think we have a fantastic group of youth advocates who are not afraid to speak truth to power about how the climate crisis has been tackled and what needs to be done. I think there's a huge opportunity to listen very closely to those voices and actually make change. We are sitting here making decisions for actually another generation. And I think it's very important to have that generation as key actors and shapers of this discussion. As private sector, I think it's really important to look at what both the future of work and the future of business looks like through a different generational lens, and really take that approach towards how we solve problems for the future. The goals have a 15-year 15-year horizon, but if we don't put in place the people that will most be impacted post those 15 years, then I think we're failing to actually make decisions through the right lens and with the right people. So I'm continuously energized by youth activists, the challenges we get from young business leaders about how to set things right for the future.
Thank you.
I think, most of my excitement in the coming period is coming from the ingredients of the region and of the post-pandemic to accelerate and to really tackle this action plan. Young generation joining the workforce, and of course much more sensible to sustainability, flexibility and leadership vision to accelerate this transformation, workforce organization, supply chain resilience and reorganization. So I think we can see all those ingredients that some of them were starting in a bad context, I would say, can turn into advantage to accelerate. This is what we are trying to work on, and I think this is giving a real hope for the world, but that may play in an accelerated way in the region.
I hope so. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.